I just want to repeat once again our profound thanks to Heritage, to American Fine Art. We spoke about the opportunity for the digital subscription. We will follow up on that in an email to follow with sincerest thanks for everything that is done for the conference by American Fine Art. We so appreciate it, and for Arts and Crafts, which we see as all about American visual culture. Again, to the sponsors and to the O'Brien Art Foundation for the challenge that hopefully will galvanize more people, because we want your participation. As I said, I guess I'm the Rosie the Riveter for the American art movement, and we need you. Having said that, and two other profound thanks. One, to the IAC team, because without them, no house. So, and honestly, we there's in bad politics, there's the expression punch down, but in heartfelt ambition, there's the expression punch above your weight, and that's what we strive to do. So although, without the bellicosity, maybe, an energetic lift. And the second thanks was to everyone who's participated in this program. One of the things we are deeply committed to is bringing all perspectives to bear. And Dan, we thank you. I just want to point out you are not the lone collector in the room by far. And we want more collectors in the room. So more everyone, but more collectors. And collecting itself is a topic that we really need to devote more attention to. It is critical. There's a lot of attention being given to it. Now, housekeeping. There is a contradiction between text and website and D. Wigmore Fine Art. They think we are starting at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Therefore, 10 o'clock is the start time, so it's 10 to 11:30. No, you will not be lashed for an error, but just so that I am correct, because Erin pointed the dichotomy out to me and said that she had spoken with Emily Lenz. So it is 10 to 11:30. It's an absolutely wonderful gallery. And the building is great, and it's also a very good location for wherever it is that you might want to go afterwards, including the American Art Fair. And one of the dealers who is showing has joined us, Howard Godell, whom I've known for years, and I guess he's here for the last panel, which we're thrilled. And, the art market is a critical component of the study of the history of art and collecting. So I'm just putting in my bid for the fact that, we are all for people acquiring, institutions acquiring, exhibiting, etc. This is all about what creates a thriving art culture, as Alsop would have said. Anyway, once again, enough of me. So this last conversation has taken some changes of shape due to illness and other, what can we say, challenges. So what we are talking about here is culture under peril. And the reason I'm being so pointed about this is that, and particularly in the United States, We have often the luxury of, quote, otherizing problems. So, oh my God, half a world away, someone cannot get a vaccine or someone is not getting food. Those othering days, one, because of increased globalization, two, climate, three, some of our own short-sightedness, irrespective of what our individual politics might be. So those distances are shrinking, one, and two, some of the stuff we feel right here. So it seemed like a very good idea to have a case study of the Cone Building, which is a very important structure in DC, and you'll hear about this in a moment. So the way this section is now going to work is John is going to do an introduction, if you will, about the building and some broader definitions of New Deal, if you will, and what we're really referencing with that moniker, which is a broader scope of work, so to speak. Then we are thrilled that Jennifer Gibson, who is the former director of the art programs, what is the proper term? The GSA's art programs, and that she is here, and she is going to talk to us about the situation today. And one thing to remember, and I read a great quote this morning, which is, sometimes we say good enough for government work, and the problem is that slamming the people who do the work. And everybody should remember that, because the people who are doing the work are trying like all get out. It is the people who want to prevent them from doing the work that is the question. Anyway, then following that, what we're going to do is have a conversation, hopefully with all of you, asking whatever questions you have about where we find ourselves today. Yes, with regard to the Cone Building, but also, if you will, in larger terms, with regard to New Deal structures, et cetera, that are imperiled. This is a really important conversation. We are at a pivotal point in terms of where our culture is and what is happening. I mean, I was there when they rebuilt the Frauenkirche. Yes, you can rebuild, but when you knock the building down, it's still a fairly definitive statement. So with that, I turn it over to John. And from there, we'll go to Jennifer, and then Eric and I will join in, and we will try to answer as many questions or create as many questions as possible. So that's what's going to happen. I don't know, I got too many of these things.
Hi again. the go-to new dealer. I'm again. Thank you. Cheers. Really appreciate the invitation from Lisa to speak about this really important and alarming and anxiety-inducing situation. To hear from Jennifer Gibson, who can offer much more perspective, insight, and experience than I can. But I'll just, by way of a brief introduction, say the Wilbur J. Cohen Building, it's in Washington, D.C. It's been called the Sistine Chapel of the New Deal for its distinguished suite of murals by Ben Shahn, Philip Guston, Seymour Fogel, the Megafan sisters. There's also great exterior relief sculptures as well. The murals were commissioned by the Section of Fine Arts, the agency I mentioned in the last panel. It oversaw art for federal buildings. And these were murals that were meant to celebrate the Social Security Act of 1935. So this was the transformative law which Roosevelt called the cornerstone of his administration, which established retirement benefits and unemployment insurance at a time when most Americans, you basically worked until you dropped, you would face starvation if fired or injured. So really transformative moment in American legislative history. And when Ben Shahn learned he'd won the commission to paint murals for the central corridor of the Cohen building, he wrote to the head of the section, and I quote, "To me, it is the most important job I could want. The building itself is a symbol of perhaps the most advanced piece of legislation enacted by the New Deal, and I am proud to be given the job of interpreting it or putting a face on it." There's a reason Seymour Fogle's mural for the Cohen building is on the cover of my book, New Deal Art. The building, the murals, they gave indelible form, I think, to New Deal tenets: the dignity of labor, the benefit of public works, the need for a social safety net. And Fogle's mural in particular captures this belief in the mutual reinforcing power of expert planning and ennobled labor. So if you've been following the news or following the headlines, the Cohen building and these murals, they are in peril. The Cohen is one of over 40 federal properties currently slated for accelerated disposition, in the slightly Orwellian phrase. And if the Cohen building is sold, these masterpieces of public art, there's a concern, as Timothy Noah reported in the New Republic, that a private developer may not be willing to bear the cost of renovating and maintaining the building, which has decades of deferred maintenance. So the concern is, would it be cheaper? Is the land more valuable than the building that's on it? That's worst case scenario, but this is why a lot of alarm bells have been ringing, and there have been op-eds in The Atlantic. Holland Cotter wrote in New York Times and Washington Post. And Hyperallergic reported on the calls by contemporary artists on the Jewish Museum to support the preservation campaign. Here's a QR code to sign the petition, which has been put forward by the Living New Deal. That's the organization that's been mentioned a couple of times already. It's the nonprofit that's dedicated to documenting the scope and impact of the New Deal on American lives, the national landscape, and it's really leading the charge to raise public awareness. We're at almost 10,000 signatures, so getting close to that 10,000 number. And I want to give a shout out to the tireless Mary Oken, who's the assistant director of the Living New Deal, who deserves more credit than she's been willing to take for really being the force behind the preservation campaign. She's been supported by Erica in these efforts. We've done what we can. But in addition to all the demands on Erica's time in terms of teaching, researching, writing, Erica has also been an indispensable partner to the Living New Deal as a member of the Advocating for New Deal Art Advisory Board. And we had a chance to go visit the Cohen last month. So I'm gonna just mention very quickly that New Deal art has always been in peril. There were cases of censorship at the time. A mural by Charles White that was meant to be installed at the Chicago Public Library was deemed unfit by the head of the library system in Chicago. It's now lost. One of these great tragic, especially for Chicagoans, right, Bob? The loss of this mural is really, really tragic. In the slightly ad hoc wind down of the art programs, unallocated artworks were also sold basically for scrap. So there's a lot to think about in terms of what peril means in this context. And of course, more recently in 2019, there's also censorship over the imagery in some of these murals and concerns about how they speak to the current moment. But I want to hand it over to Jennifer Gibson, who former director for the Center of Fine Arts of the General Services Administration. We're so fortunate to have her here. Jennifer can give us much needed context, perspective on the role of the GSA in caring for our cultural heritage. And Jennifer also suggested that she might be able to offer some optimism and encouragement, much needed at this moment of peril. So Please welcome Jennifer.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, people usually wonder, like, GSA, like what in the world's GSA? I'm connected here. Is it not working? There we go. So I can flap my hands. I actually started my academic dissertation. I was a pre-doc fellow at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, where I was studying art and politics in the 1930s, a far too big a topic. You want me to? Yeah. Okay, then they. I will shut this off and go to this. Okay, is that good? Okay. Okay, there we go. I feel like I'm undressing in public. Oh, well, you know what? You're tangled in my necklace, so we're just going to go. So I was a pre-doc fellow and never finished that dissertation. I went on to a different topic because it was just too massive, and I was having too much fun in the Archives of American Art, reading everything, and then running up here and interviewing artists who were the last, late stage New Deal artists. And then when I went to GSA, suddenly the New Deal and the 1930s came back into my life. And I thought, what an amazing privilege I have to be involved in and responsible for all these works, not only the New Deal works, but the collection that, oddly enough, and most of you have never thought about this, the General Services Administration has of over 27,000 artworks dating from the 1850s to work that's being installed today. And the New Deal, it comprises a large part of the collection. And the reason that it's part of the General Services Administration, and GSA is representing the federal government. So when we would bring lawsuits and I'd be signing off of these things, would say United States government. It always felt so strange, but GSA is responsible on behalf of the federal government. The agency was established in 1949 by President Truman, and it was under the Federal Property and Administrative Services Act. And as part of that act, it transferred all the functions of the Federal Works Agency from Treasury to GSA. So that included all the New Deal stuff, as well as all of the federal buildings. And so to today, that's what GSA's role is. It's leading the charge on IT. So like during the pandemic, we all were the guinea pigs. We had the latest IT stuff. We went from in-office to home without skipping a beat. We just kept functioning. We also are the agency that buys all the cars, buys the pencils, buys whatever, and the agency that builds and maintains federal buildings. And from the beginning, the federal government has commissioned artwork. So there's all these works that are in federal buildings, but during the 1930s, as we've been discussing, there were all of these additional programs that had multiple components. And as John showed you earlier, there were the four main fine arts programs, and the GSA collection focuses on traditional fine art. So it's painting, sculpture, prints, some photographs. The Index of American Design is at the National Gallery. The posters are at the Library of Congress. All that other ephemera is dispersed or destroyed. And we did not collect, for example, the handicrafts or the dioramas from museums, all these other things, because for much of that was made not as permanent, but really as something that was intended to be more ephemeral. The first of the programs, the PWAP, short-lived, only 6 months, produced a lot of work, in particular, a lot of sketches that were then realized, mural proposals realized later on. The artists under the PWAP were employees. So all those works that they produced, all that these easel paintings, for example, remain the property of the federal government. They were created by federal employees. John Sloan, for example, was a PWAP work. And as we go through this, I'm going to be showing you a lot of works that were recovered. And by recovered, I mean that the federal government, as you can imagine, has many people doing many different things, having lots of different rules, and the rules change, and administrations change. And it's like always trying to keep up with this. But by law, the federal government can't just dispose of property. I can't take a piece of federal property, stick it on the sidewalk, and if you pick it up, I've abandoned it and it's yours. It doesn't work that way. If I leave it on the sidewalk and you pick it up, I can come knocking at your door and say, you have federal property. And with the New Deal artwork, a lot of it was the catalogs, the processing of where it is, who was responsible for it, was quite dispersed. And over the years, nobody was keeping single inventories. So a lot of that work sort of just disappeared, or it was, as we look through, it was in people's offices. It was these, an individual piece in a congressman's office. When he leaves, the staff takes it off, puts it in the trash, and then somebody picks it up and says, this is a nice painting. And 50 years later, it's at Christie's. I've been to Christie's talking to them about this, because it's what happens is, with all good intent, people think, oh, this is just, it's been in Aunt Minnie's living room for 50 years. She loved this painting, and so we don't need it, we're going to sell it. And when it appears on the market, we're looking at it saying, this is actually something that's probably the federal government's. And so the Inspector General became a strong advocate for recovering these works that belong to the American public. And I think, as Erica mentioned, all of this work that I'll be showing you was paid for by your tax dollars. The whole collection is a public collection that's basically held in trust for the public. And the goal of the programs initially, and the goal of the programs continues to be to make that work available to the public. So this John Sloan was found, and the possessor, we don't call them the owners, we call them the possessors, the people who happen to have the work at the moment, was contacted. And eventually the work was then turned over to the federal government. And there's lots of correspondence and official stuff that goes on in the interim, but the government can't pay you for that work because it belongs to the government. They can't give you a tax break. Like, there's nothing the government can do except give you a certificate, a big handshake. And we would say to the possessor, is there an institution that you would like us to loan this to? Because the agency's, GSA's goal is to reclaim these arts, conserve them, and then send them out to museums where they will be available to the public. And so in this case, it was Detroit. So the staff contacts the museum in question. If the museum agrees to the loan, the government ships the work, so the institution's not incurring costs for this. It's coming conserved, but it's coming with a credit line. And the credit line is designated by the person who's returned this work to the government. And this is an instance, this was Charles Peril and Kathy Terrell. So thereafter, anytime the work is shown, anytime the work is displayed or listed, it would carry that credit line. And that's really the one way we found we can try to thank the people who took care of these works over the years. The section of fine arts, in contrast to the other programs, the artists were under contract. They received a commission. There were competitions that went on because this program was intended to be the high quality artwork. And the work was being commissioned for new federal buildings. So when you look at the Federal Triangle, when you look at the Cohen Building, all those were constructed, and 1% of the construction cost was used for commissions. And there was a committee of people selecting the artists. And sometimes the committee would select a group and they'd have others that they still wanted to use. And those artists would sometimes be contacted for a post office in Jersey City or someplace else where they thought the work would be appropriate. The artists were given the basic subject matter. So this was not I'm coming and this is the work I'm going to create. They were, like the Department of Justice is full of murals and sculptures that relate to justice. And just as the Cohen Building has works related to Social Security. An aside, Social Security never occupied the building. It was finished just as the war was starting, so the war offices were in there, and then other agencies, and most recently Voice of America, who still is in the building. Just examples of some other murals that are in, and works that are in Washington. Groppers, which is fantastic. If you can take tours of the interior building. A great mural. Some of the Department of Justice. These sculptures were the ones covered up because of the nudity at one point when Attorney General Ashcroft was there. When Gonzalez came in, they took off the robes. These are like little things one has to deal with in these jobs. Biddle painted, this is a detail of his mural in one of the stairwells at Justice. And it was Biddle who went to Roosevelt and said, they were Groton school bunch chums, and said, we really should be having a program for the nation to basically create this national legacy. And he also, along with others, encouraged that artists said artists are workers too, just as plumbers, just as road builders, all these other people, they're workers, they're part of America, and they should be supported. And examples of some of the sculptures, these at the Federal Trade Commission. But these works are just not in Washington. They are across the country, and as all of you know, many of them in post offices. At one point, it was, I think, in the 1970s, there was an act, the Postal Services Act of some kind, and all the post office any building that housed a post office and housed other federal offices was either going to go to GSA or the Postal Service. And it was dependent upon 51% occupancy. So whoever occupied a little bit more of the building was then going to be responsible. So there are post office courthouses that are owned by the Postal Service. There are some owned by GSA. The standalone post offices were generally their Postal Service. GSA has no jurisdiction over the artwork that is in the Postal Service owned buildings. We worked closely with the person who had been there. He retired, and I think things are in a bit of disarray. Just examples of other works across the country. And as you can see, the work, it tends to be it's realistic. It's a message of history or the locale. It's intended to sort of be a record of the nation. And I just thought, I'll show you some of the things that were just like a routine part of the job. This is a Philip Guston mural that was in a federal building in Laconia, New Hampshire, that had been a forestry building. There was on one side was the Guston, and on the other, Musa McKim. And lovely murals. This was at this point occupied by the IRS, and there was absolutely no public access. And one of the tenets of dealing with this collection is that there always be some public access. Now, public can be defined in many different ways, and it might be difficult to get to some of these, but I couldn't get into this space to see the murals. We had to make arrangements with IRS. We got in and saw that somebody had thoughtfully put sheets of plexi over the murals so they weren't damaged, but we were then able to arrange to remove them. And yesterday it was interesting seeing the mural hearing about that, the Wyeth mural being removed, which is part of the routine of this work, because there are just situations where this building was going to leave the GSA inventory. We were not confident it was going to be a public building or that there was going to be access. You get entangled with lots of different groups like the State Historic Preservation offices. But in this case, we were able to make a valid argument that these murals should be removed, and they've been conserved. And white lead is just also part of this world. There's all these things were adhered with white lead. Most recently, we were working on a project in Huntsville, Alabama, where we found they also used asbestos. And so then it turns into a large project of training everybody how to deal with asbestos and sealing off the rooms, removing the murals. But it's all possible. And that's one message I want to convey is it's possible to move art. And so the Guston and McKim were both moved. They sat in our warehouse for a while as we looked for a location for them. We suggested Maine. The people in Maine said, no, it says White Mountains. It can't be here. And so we ended up, they were temporarily on loan to the Curry Museum in Manchester, and then went to where they're now permanently installed, the Cleveland Federal Building in Concord, New Hampshire. The TRAP program sort of picked up some of the aspects of the WPA. And I think one of the interesting components of this one is there would be a lead artist and who did not have to be on relief. And then that artist could have a team. And those artists all had to be basically on relief. So one example you have here, you could go down to Bowling Green, the Reginald Marsh murals, and Philip Guston was one of the people working on the project that Marsh had brought him on. And again, this is a set of murals that relates to the environment. This was the Custom House, it's at the harbor, and so everything in this set of murals relates to the New York harbor and scenes. There were some smaller works created under TRAP, and this was actually the first artwork recovered by GSA. And it was oddly enough, my husband saw it in a catalog that an auction house in Maine had sent to him. And he said to me, don't you think this might belong to the government? And so I in turn shared it with the person who was dealing with fine arts at the time. And there was some litigation, but eventually it did come back to the government. And it was in turn, the State Department had it as part of its collections. And so GSA then transferred it to the State Department, and it's part of the Art and Embassy program. As we've all been talking about the WPA, and I have to say, for the most part, everybody says, oh, WPA. It just has, it's the shorthand for New Deal, because it was so massive and it did so many things. Oh, I should add, TRAP was intended to provide funds so artwork could be created for federal buildings that already existed. So the government was thinking not only about its new buildings it was making, but the buildings that were already in the inventory, which didn't have art, then were given a legal mechanism for getting art funds and commissioning artwork. So it was a benefit basically to the public. The WPA, those artists were all on the relief rolls. They were paid a weekly salary, $23 and something, and were expected to turn in so much work. The work varied greatly. There were the mural painters who were just producing things, and every so many weeks they had to turn in a painting. Printmakers had to do so many prints, and each printmaker was allowed 3 prints for their personal use. They were not supposed to sell them. And they weren't their heirs' property to then sell. Nobody, most of the prints have just gone into the public sector. There were sculptures, and there were also a number of murals. And this is where the mural situation gets to be very interesting, because the government, some of the murals were in government buildings. Many of them were in hospitals, libraries, community centers, et cetera, around the country. Some of them were in facilities where the government paid the salary of the artist, but the site and the materials were donated by various entities. And so ownership becomes an issue. It's almost by object. Example of one of the prints. GSA does have a lot of the prints, but it's on rare occasions that GSA would make a claim that a print remained federal property. And it's generally when there is a work that, and I've seen some of these, they're in a frame, they have a tag on the back that it had been in a show at MoMA in 1937. Like, there's all this documentation that ties it directly to the federal government and to a specific incident. Whereas for the most part, you're going to just see hundreds of prints, and I'd say enjoy them. It's like Adrian Toy also painted. And so this is an example of one of his paintings, which had quite a recovery saga where the person was contacted. And basically an agent contacts you, sends a letter, says, we believe this may be federal property. Please don't take it anywhere. We will be doing the research to see its status. Instead, this person ran away and then was tracked down. then said, I left it on the loading dock at the Art Institute of Chicago. Agents hate this kind of thing. And so the FBI gets involved. It, like, as with anything, it can grow. And the person sold it in Boston to someone who had no idea all of this other was going on, and the person fled the country. And we found it in Boston, explained all of this, and so it was then recovered. It's now on loan in Illinois, and now this was a number of years ago, and the person was on the reentry watch list. So it's not that the individual artwork is necessarily so valuable, but it's this concern that this is part of the federal legacy. It's all the heritage of all of us and belongs to the public. And so you make every effort to bring it back. Another work that was recovered, and in part it was through looking at yearbooks from this high school where we could see that the painting was on the wall in the high school. So there are many different ways of trying to figure out if an artwork actually was created as part of the WPA. And it's the artists were they were painting. So not every work they produced during this time was a New Deal artwork. Ad Reinhardt was making many paintings. We wouldn't go out and say, oh, these all belong to the federal government. You have to demonstrate that this particular piece is one of interest to the government. And it's now at MoMA. How do we do all this? It's all of these, there are lots of markings on them. There are paper labels. Sometimes people peel off the label, but we can see where the label was. Just examples of various labels. This is an instance of an artwork that was brought into the Yellowstone Museum. It had a big puncture in it, and somebody brought it and said, I don't have space for it, we can't take care of it. And the museum looked at it and thought, this may actually be federal. We had it picked up, conserved it, sent it back. It's now in Wyoming. But this was on the back of it. So, clear evidence that it was federal property. There are also often metal tags. And if people pry off the tags, but the little holes are there, and this is where original frames are wonderful. You can, not only is it the style of the frame, but it's the history of the marks on the frame that are critical quite often to understanding a work. Stamps, inventory lists at National Archives, and even things like these exhibitions that were set up where you can see the artworks that were displayed. So there are many ways of looking at all this. But also going back to Peril. And right now, we're looking at the Cohen building as one set of threats. There are other threats that are, the political situations change, public sentiment changes, and so 3 years ago, it was people wanted to get rid of New Deal art because they didn't like the content. And in this instance, the Life of Washington, they were going to the public and parents wanted these murals painted over. There was going to be a compromise of putting a curtain over them, but then it was finally resolved. The paintings are in place, but we thought maybe the federal government owned them. So did extensive research, contacted the schools, contacted the school board, and we were never able to demonstrate clear ownership, so did not make a claim on those paintings. In contrast, the Bernard Zachheims at University of California, San Francisco's medical school, where the building was going to be torn down, there we actually found documentation for this set of murals that in a conference room, but the government doesn't have the money to go and take all of these murals and care for them. And University of California was fantastic in just setting up teams, doing extensive photo documentation, having them removed, providing us with allowing us to participate, providing us with all the conservation plans so we knew what was going to be happening. And they have been rolled, they're being conserved, and the university is looking for a new site for installing them because this building's being torn down. Which takes us back to Ben Shahn. And obviously, they're in a federal building. There are, with these buildings, the government frequently disposes of buildings. When that happens and there's artwork, there's a whole series of steps, but there are protective covenants that go into place. So if the building's being sold, the covenants would say there is the Ben Shahn mural, describe the whole thing, and either the mural would remain fully owned by the federal government, it would be turned over in good condition, the new owner would be expected to maintain it in that condition. And there would always be a plaque explaining what it is. If in some instances, federal government retains underlying ownership or first interest, basically, the murals would transfer to the new owner, but they would not be permitted to destroy, alter, or remove them because the federal government is the first party that could say, no, we're going to remove them. And the other alternative, and in the case of these murals, is removal. And as I've shown you, removing murals is something that's gone on many times. This is a big job, but the conservation assessment that's been done for this and for all the other work in the building includes a description of how they could be removed with potential costs to do so. So if the building were to be knocked down, I think the case would certainly be made, and the public outcry that's gone on to have these works removed and then figure out what to do with them. It's like first step, take care of the art. Second step, figure out where to move. And in these instances, like what can the public do? The public's been doing what it needs to do. I can't tell you how startled non-art people in the government are by the amount of news arts creates. Like I would sometimes go to meetings that say, you just don't want to do that because you're not going to like the news that comes out. So there is virtue sometimes in that the public notice of, we know that's there, we care, we don't want it destroyed. And there are buildings across the country that have New Deal murals, many not owned by the government. So in your towns, when there's the local library that has a New Deal mural, the government does not have jurisdiction over that mural. That's where local historic societies, the library, there needs to be a local plan to try to preserve that work, contact the government, because at least you will get a confirmation that it's not owned by the government, but that the government wants the work preserved if at all possible. And it also opens up the way for you to apply for grants because many grantors don't want to give funds if they think it's owned by the federal government. So it's a lot of work on the part of the public to save these things, but it's possible. So, and I can say the government's continuing to commission. So there are new works coming. It had, the commitment to art hasn't died. It has its ups and downs, but it goes on. So thank you.
Okay, we have effectively 10 minutes for questions. So, who's got a question? Who's got a question? And if you guys want to go up there, but we have not much time. We are going to push the envelope here. The stated topic of the panel was culture in peril, and it was a case study of the Cohen building. So we've contextualized it. We've talked about how government protects work. What questions do you have? Because this is a slam bang group of people, so to speak. Maybe that was too crude. Sorry. This is a fabulously informed group of people, and I myself have opinions about where we are, which you will definitely hear. But who has a question? Anne.
Jennifer, I hope I can just use my old teaching voice. Thank you so much for both the overview and the stories. But going back to the Cohen building itself, I'm going to do that old, did I hear you right? Because I thought from what I read that the murals, with the exception of the one that was on canvas, that they would basically be things that could never be removed because they were done not, in a Renaissance, but they were intact on the wall. But I hear you say
They're secco fresco.
yeah. So, but then I thought you were saying, well, whenever we do this, we have plan A, plan B, plan C being they can be removed. So in the case of the Cohen building, for those ones that are true fresco, when you say remove, are we talking about like digging in the wall?
Yes,
and,
slicing the wall.
Okay. Sorry, I'm being very literal, but I want to make sure. Yeah.
Which is why it's complex,
Yeah.
but it's possible.
Okay.
And I think
Okay. Yeah.
there would be a matter of funding. You can, to a new owner, sometimes put the condition, fine, you don't want these as part of the transfer, the deed, you have to pay for the removal.
Right.
And I'll go and say, I have similar concerns, only having been involved in this mural situation recently. And with that parameter put on the building now, it wasn't with the weight of the government behind it, but it was done so quickly and so poorly as to severely damage the work. And so I know there's a level of professional conservator that needs to be engaged in. That would be something that's like bid out, or is there a team or on staff?
There are not conservators on staff, but there are things called IDIQ contracts, indefinite quantity contracts with conservators. So I think David Olin at one point David Olin is the conservator who's worked on this project. He would be the one, because there's, in the government, you can create conditions. So like whenever there was something was going to happen to the artwork, it was my responsibility to review or have somebody review and recommend to me that the plan was okay, approve the person doing it. And there are criteria for the professional expertise they have to bring. So there are a lot of checks along the way. Now, I say all this, I recognize we're in a crazy time and somebody could just like tomorrow knock it down, right? But I'm going to, as we were talking the other day, I'm going to remain optimistic. And there remains professional staff. When I was there, I had about 30 people. There are now 11. They are doing all of the collections management. They're doing the conservation. They are also doing new commissions. So they are like anybody in government, they're exhausted, stretched thin, but they're there, they're committed, they're doing their job, and they're shouting out if things aren't right. And oddly enough, within GSA, there's been great respect for the art. So in that way, I'm hopeful.
Jason.
So I've been very active in this period, going back to this. I've been very active in this period, going back to the Stone Age, going back to 1979. I knew a lot of these artists. I knew them, Ethel Magafin. I knew Carl Fortes. I gave a lot of these names to the GSA when the GSA had lost contact with these artists. That's how far back we go. So the GSA is a great entity. It's gone through a lot of challenges. At one time, the GSA ignored this. They ignored this period. And as I understand, things were not properly looked after. Conservation collectors came in and they bought some things. They preserved the work so that it looked good. So I'm happy you're here. I like, this conversation. But going back to Mickey Wolfson's symposium on the WPA, Will Barnett, my friend, was there, and there was a discussion, why is the GSA going after art that they abandoned, and what is the status of them going after things that were multiples that Will Barnett, for example, said he owned 3 copies. So, where are we on this? I'm really curious.
The generally multiples are not, nobody's going to come and claim multiples. It's the artwork that can be clearly demonstrated as being federally owned by having these identifying markers, being in an inventory, and coming up on the market. No one's ever going to knock on your door and say, I hear you have a painting. There was actually one left at a bus stop in Washington. So somebody turned it into us. It tends to be, there are lots of stories, and we also recognize that people have had pieces for years, and GSA did not have an active program. In 1994, Department of Interior and GSA began, under pressure from inspector generals, that they needed to professionalize the arts programs because they had just been sort of willy-nilly there. And so that's when all this inventorying began.
Okay, that's very good. May I ask, so what is the status on the maquettes?
The
Because
maquettes?
The maquettes that were done for murals,
Okay,
I
the
knew that-
maquettes, for the most part, are not owned by the government.
they are not.
Most of them are
Good,
not.
okay.
You can always contact Fine Arts at GSA just to say, do you have any interest? I would guess almost all of the time, there is absolutely nothing, unless there happened to have been an artist contract that said
Okay.
now in contemporary art, like with art and architecture, there is a clause in their contracts that the materials presented to the panel to review and approve a project belong to the government. But the New Deal stuff did not have that clause. So we've had some, like Peter Poor donated his father's murals to us, the mural sketches, because he didn't need them anymore, but they were not federal property.
I have a follow-on. Erica, you and I had a conversation at one point where we were talking about the marketplace and what is the experience now of people involved in this issue with what happens with the identifying labels, markers, etc., on objects that do find their way into the marketplace.
So Lisa's asking a question about people ripping off the labels from the New Deal artwork, and stuff that gets onto the market, and people know it's New Deal art, but they're denying that it's New Deal art. I think there's a lot of wariness. I think there's a lot of worry. But I found your conversation really helpful in that, okay, the GSA itself, which wasn't around during the New Deal era, but during the New Deal era, if you were allowing printmakers to have 3 of their own prints, that automatically mucks up who owns what in terms of multiple art. And if you're saying maquettes for murals are not federal property. So I find this kind of interesting now. This public-private is much more muddy and more complicated. It's the people's art, but and some of it's going to end up on the market.
It's very complicated, but there's also been litigation. In February 25, Southern District of New York founded that determined the ownership of a New Deal painting was actually federal. And it was the first case that went all the way through the process. And the judge made the decision. She said, basically, these were made for the public. The whole intention was for the public. And they have the status of being protected as historic records, just as NARA documents are protected. So the work was then turned over to the government.
I mean, there are horror stories all over. My favorite horror story is the Sergeant Johnson screen horror story. So Sergeant Johnson did a beautiful screen in 1934 with the PWAP in Oakland, California, for a school of the deaf. Am I right? And beautiful, beautiful wooden screen. It ended up in the basement of the University of California, Berkeley, which had taken over the school in the 1950s. And it was sold for $160 in the early 21st century to some guy who recognized it for what it was, who had then turned it around and eventually sold it to, where is it now?
Huntington.
It's at the Huntington, and it's valued at well over $1 million. There are stories like this that
But
are
that's
out
more
there.
complicated.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, it's really complicated.
Because in that one, we were asked if it was federal property.
Yeah.
And we could not find the documents. So we said no, but we thought it was fantastic. It was going to the Huntington. It would have a good home. It would be in the public. And subsequently, we actually found the documents. It's federal.
Okay.
But we're just not, it has a happy home.
Right, except the Huntington is a private museum.
I know.
Yeah, so.
It's protected.
Okay. We are about 10 minutes over, so I'm just going to sit here and say a few things. And, hope that the few of you who are here will take these things to heart and that we will find ourselves back here next year with a renewed sense of vigor and perhaps actually at points in between, because we are here for the long haul. Basically, what I wanted to show you are a few newspaper clippings. I apologize. Next year, I will open with a PowerPoint that shows this image. But this is the Oval Office, and it is quote unquote encircled by gold. And what is being shown here is the proliferation of embellishment and the increased number of paintings being hung with wider gold frames. And I love gold and I love frames. So please know that. More such imagery here. The reason I'm showing you these things is because all of this matters. Whatever your ideology, I'm sensing that perhaps I know what the tendency of the room is, but perhaps not. But whatever your ideology is, we live in a period where our art, our culture is taken seriously, whatever side you're on. And you can't be complacent about it. Because there is an advocated style for sculpture. There is an advocated style for architecture. There are institutions that, feel that the pressure about particular artists is too intense, particular works of art are too intense. So, at the same time, you have a market where there are some marvelous things available and on offer. It's a great time, actually, to be looking at American art and to be thinking about it. It's also a great time to be researching and exhibiting American art because there's a real hunger for what is not known about. So essentially, what I'm trying to say here is, yes, we are facing culture in peril. I mean, I think we also have to recognize the fact that the East Wing did get bulldozed, and that was a little bit of a wake-up call. Bulldozed is a little bit of a loose term, but the point is it no longer stands. And it is one thing to rule post facto. It's another thing to stay in action so that there can be deliberation. Not only, obviously, you who are in this room, you love it because you're still here. You're the last men and women standing, or whatever the gender appropriate term is in each case. But it also, take heart from the fact that it really matters. And this is rather than being a bad time to be interested in American art, it is a great time to be interested in American art. To challenge distinctions, challenge boundaries, challenge whatever the inherited canon is, broaden our thinking across media. So, for example, as Dan and Susan do, thinking about what unites paintings and photographs in which they're interested in, what are the commonalities, as well as the distinctions. To think about textiles as, part of, there's a major modernist exhibition that was rooted in largely women-created textiles. Think about it. 40 years ago, that would not have happened. It's possible 25 years ago that would not have happened. Things are changing. And so for the magazines that write about it, things are changing, my friends at American Fine Art. For the auction houses, things are changing. And for all of us, things are changing. And on the one hand, take heart from that, be inspired by that, know that this is the beginning of another, hopefully, great period, such as that was triggered by the bicentennial. It's interesting that very few people have alluded to the semi-sesquicentennial, yes, I said that word, which is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration. I think we're going to see a period of time in which events marking this 250th emergence period continues. But again, this is a really great time to think about American art, think about what American art means, challenge the categories, but also be resolute in what you believe, because the fact is that whilst there are legal mechanisms, there are legal protections, and there are people who work very hard to follow the law, to enforce the law, preserve the law, there are the vicissitudes of life, the actions that people take, and then there's this wonderful expression, which you will seldom hear at a gathering that is academic in nature, but I am going to say it, shit happens. And so consequently, you know, just I hope you leave feeling recommitted, enthused, wanting to come back. We love you. And knowing that what you care about really matters. Most cultures on earth, in one way or another, take to heart their quote unquote patrimony. Yes, it's a gendered word, but they do. And so should we. So I hope this is the beginning of another 30 years for IAC, a great period for American art. Once again, my profound thanks to all of you for coming, and to Heritage for hosting, to the O'Brien Art Foundation for challenging, and to everybody who is involved in meeting that challenge, and those of you whom I can persuade to do so in the future. But hopefully we are here to stay. Thank you very much, everybody. And I promise you more on the New Deal to come. And one thing to mention, we have an arts and crafts conference that goes to a different place every year. And there are expressions of the New Deal in every one of those places. And I've already pledged to Erica and to Mary that we can be deployed to focus on and to work with to try to bring attention to this. So anyway, we will see you at the Fine Art Fair this evening. We will see you at D.D. Wigmore's tomorrow. And please keep your thoughts and ideas coming. And Jason, great question. Thanks, everybody.